Hey, we're live. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Super Joystiq podcast. I'm Zav Matos, joined by Mr. Ludwig Kitzman.
Hello.
And Mr. Mike Schramm. What's up, guys?
Hello.
We've put the food away. We've decided we're just going to talk about some games this week. And, oh my God. I'm hearing all this feedback. You're going to have to forgive me for a second here.
I'm glad we've moved on to a professional level of podcast. Just kidding.
For real.
Just joking.
Oh my goodness. This is why it's always great to have a producer to fix all of these issues now. All right. Sorry about that. All of this is going to get added out in the auto show, which is perfect.
It's actually being edited out in real time, I think.
In real time, yeah, I think so.
A producer can travel back in time and rearrange.
Jonathan's going to take care of all of this stuff. So this week we have BioShock Infinite. Lydia, you also saw Thief. There are a couple of GDC games that you saw, like iOS and other mobile games that you saw at GDC as well, Mike, that I haven't even really heard about some of these titles, so it's going to be interesting to hear you talk about that stuff. Before we roll into BioShock and the mobile stuff, because I know it's probably going to take a little bit longer to talk about those titles, let's talk about Thief, which is a preview that you just saw recently. That a preview went up on, if you're watching this today, it's live on joystiq.com right now. And if you are listening to the auto show, you can go back and look at our the show notes to find out, to look for the link for the preview that Letty just wrote up. So, Letty, you saw Thief being developed by Edios Montreal. Thankfully, still in development, even though Square Enix is bleeding money, as they say. So, what can you tell us about it?
Well, it's a first-person shooter, and that is the nightmare scenario, right?
That is the nightmare shooter. Well, I mean, it works out sometimes. I mean, it worked out for Fallout, I guess.
Yeah. So this is it is a next-gen game, so it's coming to PlayStation 4, and if you are interested in such things, the game was running at 1080p natively. So it looks fantastic. Like the environments are, it's sort of like a blend of Victorian era architecture and medieval style building. So there's like a lot of stonework and cobblestone in the street, and everything is poorly lit. But what they've really done with the art design is like everything is just covered in fog. So that now we don't have to worry about draw distance anymore. Now we can just put fog back in and cover everything.
That's exactly what they did with Silent Hill. They fixed it with that technical limitation. Yeah.
But there's just so much of it, and it really gives the game sort of this really sort of smoky atmosphere. And it's kind of like what you think you remember the original game looking like very spooky and atmospheric and dark and grimy. But if you load it up now, it just kind of looks extremely barren and flat.
Were there any supernatural elements to it? Like
there is a slight magical element to it, and that manifests in your abilities. But it's not. I didn't see any zombies or anything. Like each Thief game has like at least one scary moment, like very traumatizing level that you have to sneak through. But I didn't see any of that yet, and they're trying to ground it in reality. Like the weapons are ridiculously detailed, and they have little diagrams and explanation of how these arrows that Garrett uses would work. Like there's like a little cartridge that ejects dry ice into something, and that creates smoke. And they kind of really thought about it from that perspective, which is interesting. Cool. So it's a reboot, and what I think it has a lot of neat little touches that I think speaks to how they approach this stealth gaming as a genre. We played Mark of the Ninja, right? Like that was one of the best games last year, and it was really cool because everything in the stealth was sort of explicitly highlighted on the screen. So in the case of this game, there's something similar going on, but it's more in terms of how detailed the environment is. It gives you a very explicit idea of how visible you are, and like the contrast between light and shadow is very extreme. So here's a cool touch. When you sneak, you can sort of do this little dash into shadow and out of shadow, forward and backwards. It's kind of like the blink ability in Dishonored. But it gives you sort of this sense of momentum, and like you can create those moments where someone just kind of like catches your foot and they're not sure if you were actually there or if it was a rat or something. They just kind of like briefly glimpse you. But you can hide in someone's shadow, like the real-time shadow cast by someone holding a torch will cast a shadow behind them, and you can hide in the shadow behind them while they walk.
So you can effectively creep behind someone and pass by other guards in that shadow? That's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Little neat
What
things
is-
like that. They're using sort of particle effects. They were showing a burning building, and their wind will carry the particle effects to an exit. So instead of having an arrow pointing out where you should go, you can actually just follow the current and look up and follow the current. So that's kind of cool stuff that they're doing with the technology. But other neat touches are like your hands, because it's a first-person game. You're constantly seeing your hands, and like because this is a video podcast, I can actually show you. You always see your hands, and like he holds onto things, he touches things. Like when you're searching through drawers or across books, like he'll run his fingers across it. When you peek around a corner, he'll hold onto something, and it's like a very simple flair to the visuals, but it kind of gives you that texture and closeness. Like it's a very subtle touch, and those games are essentially about being in an environment and looking at it and kind of trying to figure out where you are in that 3D space so that you can avoid detection, right? So it's a very sensible addition.
It's weird because I know we're going to talk more about BioShock as the show goes on, but BioShock did that a couple of times, and it almost threw me off of the narrative a little bit. Like it threw me out of the thing. Like the hands looked in BioShock looked very separated from the world. Like it didn't bring me in. I don't know, but did it have that effect as you're playing through it? I guess the context sensitive stuff would be really
yeah. It's not cutscenes and stuff. Like it's not scripted.
Yeah.
It's like it's very it's procedural, right? So like things that his hands are able to attach to, they will like he'll constantly touch things, and like his hands are constantly in view.
See, even you say his
like
hands, should it be your hands? Like, shouldn't you identify with those as your hands? I don't know.
I mean, it's both, right? Like it's you and it's him. Like I'm not Garrett, but I am when I'm playing him.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's just one of those video game things.
I like that it does that versus something like Half-Life, where in Half-Life, when you pick something up, you just see the object floating in space. There is no, the only time you ever see Gordon Freeman's hands is when he uses like a pistol, and you see the hand. Otherwise, it's just the end of the gun. Well, I think that's really interesting.
Right, exactly, and I think it's really important because like it's a game about stealing, right? So whenever you pick something up, when you steal something, you can sort of hold it in your hand and look at it and examine it and feel it, and that I feel is like a good sort of reward for having successfully stolen something, because the game can't like walk around saying, "Hey, everyone, see, I stole this! Like I totally won." Because you're not supposed to be there. You're supposed to be invisible.
Right.
So you get to covet the things that you've stolen and examine them, and I think that's kind of a neat little reward. It has like a focus system where you can slow down time and target different objects on someone's person. Like if you sneak up behind someone, you can target each earring and a necklace, and like just like grab everything in one quick go and then vanish.
God, it's like the Ninja Turtles movie. The bells, remember? The bells, man, come on. They're about to remake that.
You still have your trusty blackjack.
Okay.
You still have different kinds of arrows. You have a climbing sort of hook mechanism that you can attach to grates and climb up walls and things. The demo that they showed had a lot of neat little story moments. Like he's like the old games, he's constantly narrating what's happening. He's like explaining his very cynical viewpoint on things. And what I liked is like he constantly gets distracted. He will see someone with like an expensive item, and he'll be like, "Oh, I'm gonna liberate them of that item." He just seems like someone who's constantly getting distracted, even though he's on this mission.
Sticky fingers.
He's drawn to shiny objects.
Mm-hmm. Now, originally, when this was announced years ago that Eidos Montreal was working on it, it was Thief 4, but now it's just Thief. In terms of the narrative, does it completely reboot the series?
Yeah, it does. Although it still has similar themes, like it takes place in a sort of large city, and that'll be sort of the hub. Like you'll go and purchase arrows, because ultimately there's a resource management element to it. Obviously, like you're using up tools, expendable tools to complete missions, and you'll have a hideout and things like that. It's sort of like there's a I think it's called the Watch or the something like that. There's an evil baron who's trying to like clamp down, control the whole city. And Garrett is like a free agent, and he's gonna wind up in a revolution of sorts. So not too dissimilar from Dishonored either. terms of the story.
Yeah, I was going to say there's two main things with this. Like first, like you said, is the technology, because we haven't seen a Thief using next-gen technology yet. And the second thing is this is the Thief after Dishonored. Like Dishonored, I think, really sort of took a lot of the elements that made Thief popular and then brought them to a game that a lot of people who didn't know about Thief would be interested by. So,
well, I mean, I would argue that Deus Ex did that before Dishonored even.
Human Revolution?
Yeah. But it's similar. It's certainly a similar kind of game, like the sort of the first person, not simulation, but immersion game that's not necessarily about killing, and that has a lot of options and open level design and choices available to you. And this game is it's definitely about stealing. It's not about assassination, which I think is a pretty big difference.
In fact, one of the videos they released
that are there are pretty simple.
Right. One of the videos that they released even said that you can play the entire game without killing anyone.
You can play the entire game without killing, and there's an old school mode that disables all the HUD elements and sort of contextual markers and NPC icons and all that stuff, and even disables your special abilities. So there's a mode in the game where you would have to just sneak through it unseen, based purely on your agility and your ability to sort of read a 3D space and find the good areas to hide in. I think it looks great. Like I think it looks fantastic. Like you'll want a next gen console once you've seen it.
Did they show it to you on the PC, which is comparable to the PS4 specs?
I'm assuming it's gonna run. I'm assuming it was running on a PC. Like I don't think they had a PS4 there, but like I can't imagine that the PS4 would have an issue rendering that stuff.
Right.
It looks really, really good.
I wanted to ask you
the quality of the lighting is very good. The animation is good, and there were no loading screens when they were showing it to me. So you didn't have those. Remember the loading portals in Thief 3, where it was extremely segmented because they had memory issues when they made the Xbox One version.
Yeah.
So none of that anymore.
I wanted to ask you about the visual cues of when you're in the shadows. What is it a HUD element that tells you that you're unseen, or how does it tell you that?
It seemed like there were multiple elements. Like because of your hands, like I thought you had a good sense of your 3D position, basically, like how far you extend into the light or into the shadow. But there's also a marker that shows it kind of builds up. Like if it's completely white, you're completely visible, and then it kind of dies down again. So the darker your screen is, the more hidden you are. There's like a sort of a framing of fog around your view that will completely disappear if you are completely visible. Otherwise, it becomes darker. It's almost pitch black as you're invisible.
I don't know that I would have to see that, because that sounds terrible. Because if I wanted to play that entire game stealth, then my entire screen would be obstructed by this fog. I would rather it be if you're in
like the frame, like there's like a darkening on the edges, and it becomes white if you're visible.
Okay, see, I would rather that it be if I'm visible, then it would be white at all times, than rather it be dark. I don't know.
Well, this is why the game runs in 1080p, because they're fogging up the UI all the time. They don't need to draw everything.
Yeah. They're saving on technology resources by just fogging up your UI. It's not even a draw distance issue anymore. It's just your UI.
I think it makes sense, because like when your periphery is starting to light up, it means you are visible.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well.
Plus, he has like a ninja-like mask, so like it's sort of meant to represent how obscured he is.
Sure, I guess that kind of works.
Trying to think if there's anything else we want to cover on that. It's coming out next year for PC, PS4, and next-gen platforms. It's not coming out for this current crop of consoles, right?
No, I don't think so.
Xbox, which is disappointing, because after they finished Deus Ex Human Revolution, it turned out as well as it did. I was really hoping that they'd churn out the Thief game pretty quickly.
Well,
but
it's a different team making this one, although I think they do share a few designers.
Yeah, the Ubisoft Montreal team, I think, is about over 300 people. So.
Right, it's a very big studio. One of the other cool things I thought was you're sort of making your way to sort of like a brothel, where you're supposed to go steal something or go find someone, and there's a point where there's like a change in the story beat where there's a clock that starts striking, and you have to make it to a gate before but it's like it's a town clock. It's not like there's no counter on your screen or a countdown. Like Garrett just says, like I have to get there before the eighth strike or whatever. And then suddenly it's like you're running across these rooftops, and then it's Mirror's Edge.
What? Really?
So I like that they have sort of these elements of agility and sneaking, and it seems like it's a very rich kind of game, very very deep. I think people who play on that hardcore mode will be very satisfied.
I think you just sold about 3,000 copies of the game just by saying that sentence right there.
About Mirror's Edge.
Instantly, people are like, "Whoa, interesting."
Well,
Oh.
so like they said, escaping is one of the things that they want to incorporate into the flow of the game. So it's like you infiltrate, you steal, and then you escape. And that was always my favorite part of Assassin's Creed is the escape. Because you've essentially accomplished your mission, but then you still need to get away. So I think that will be interesting what to do with that. Like, it's got really good climbing, and I mean, I loved everything about it, honestly. I thought it was great.
Cool.
I would love for it to be, if you're really successful, the escape is just a gradual walk down the street.
Right, if you play
Just a
really
pimp
well, you
walk.
just kind of...
just a light jog that you have to take back to your hideout. Hey, Mike, let's talk about the iOS games and other mobile games you saw at GDC. What are some of the highlights?
I thought GDC was good this year, and Letty, you can jump in on this. Unfortunately, Zav, we missed you there, but I saw a lot of good stuff at GDC, and some of the stuff I saw was iOS because I looked at a lot of iOS stuff, but I also saw a ton of amazing indie games. One I wanted to talk about was there's two that sort of fit together. One is called Towerfall, and the other one's called Samurai Gun, and both of them are 4-player versus games, so it's like one screen with 4 players on the same screen. And Samurai Gun, you actually played with NES controllers, which is pretty amazing. Like, the guy had set up NES controllers to play with. But in Towerfall, you play as archers, and in Samurai Gun, you play as samurai. And the way it works is there's 4 of you jumping around the screen like little platforms, and then in the Samurai one, you slash swords, in Archers, you shoot the arrows, in Towerfall, you shoot arrows. And it was super fun, like really great one-screen multiplayer with 4 players. I don't know how they're going to turn these things into games, like full games, because I think you need a single-player mode or something like that. But both of the games are really a lot of fun. And like on Towerfall, you shoot arrows and then stick in the wall, and you have to go pick them up again. Like, you'd have to re-pick up your arrows to get more ammo. Samurai Gun had a cool mechanic where every time you killed someone, the screen like went all black, and then just one strip of video went across, and it showed you the death that you just caused in slow motion. So like everybody had to watch all the kills as the screen cut across. It was a really cool stylistic thing. And then the other fun stylistic thing about Samurai Gun was if a game tied at the very end, it went to 2 people in this other battle, and the arena was like just a big flat screen, and there's a sun going down in the background. And the sun setting in the background was your timer. So someone had to kill the other before the timer ran out. And it would just look like a cool 8-bit like samurai movie version. So that one's called Samurai Gun. The other one's called Towerfall. I don't know how they're going to turn into actual games, but
Who was the developer behind this?
I don't remember what the developer's name was, unfortunately. You can look up Towerfall online. I know the guy's got a blog. It's just one developer. And Samurai Gun, I'm not sure as well. They're both companies that I hadn't heard of before. Just indie teams. And they're just super fun multiplayer experiences. Again, I don't know how they're going to translate them to actual like release titles, but
well, I mean, just
really
based on your description, it sounds like Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah, it's almost like that. It is sort of simple platformy combat, but both of them had just really cool art and really cool styles. So it almost feels like Johann Sebastian Joust in that it's a great game to show off at a convention, but I don't know how it turns into like a great game that you eventually will release. So we'll see how it all turns out. Rain was another game I really liked, and Letty, you played that one, right?
Yeah, Rain is really cool. I think it has a great atmosphere that everyone can relate to, which is, there's that constant raining sort of, I know, it had like a sad tone to it, but like it wasn't intentional. It was just kind of tied to the weather in the game.
It was raining. Yep. Raining is sad. Yep. But no, it's like
you walk through the rain and nobody sees you.
It's almost it's almost a platformer, but there isn't actually any jumping. It's just sort of moving from space to space in this game. And the mechanic is that, when you're out of the rain, you are invisible. When you go into the rain, you can be seen because the raindrops, like this little boy turns invisible, so the raindrops make him seen. So there are monsters that you have to escape from, and like to escape from them, you have to duck into like underneath platform underneath a shelter or something like that where the rain isn't, and then you become invisible. And there's also, it's a very Ico feel because there's this girl that you're sort of following along with, and you sort of have to like connect up with at certain points and get closer to her and follow her, and it's interesting. I don't know, it's really cool. And that one is coming on PSN soon-ish, like sometime later on this year.
It seemed more like a sort of a storybook thing. It wasn't. There was the gameplay itself was just trying to get from one story beat to the next, because every time you go underneath shelter or when you're about to be attacked, at least in the video I saw, it would just kind of tell a little bit of a story, and then you'd run behind shelter, and then it would start to continue that story out.
Yeah, they were only showing a short demo there, and I got the impression, I had a quick little talk with them, and I got the impression that that demo was basically made for GDC just to like show off what the game is. So I don't know if the demo is really representative of what the actual story is. But I think they have a lot. There are some interesting mechanics there in terms of what you can see. The other thing is like, so there's one part where the camera cuts ahead and you sort of walk through this place that's entirely under shelter, so there's no rain at all, so you can't see your guy. But the way that you can know where you are on screen is that you bump into things, like you bump into a crate of things, and it knocks it over. And so it's really cool to like walk around this room, and you don't actually see your character, but you can see the effects of what he does. And I don't know. Again, I don't know how they'll turn that into like a cohesive story and a you know, what they want to do with it, but the mechanic is just really cool. Like the idea that you are controlling this character that you can't see, you can only interact with. The other thing is they use the Clair de Lune, like the very famous piece of classical music, and that music with the rain was just like a gorgeous, like Luddy said, like a really gorgeous, like emotional feeling. It was really impressive. So again, it's just a demo. I don't know what's going to come out of it or what the game is going to end up being like, but it was really impressive, and it definitely felt different from a lot of the other stuff that we were seeing come out of GDC. And the last thing I want to mention real quick is Icicle. It's a game called Icicle, and it's done by the guy who did Wonder Putt, which is like a really wild, abstract putting game. It's on iOS, but there's also a Flash version of it that was really popular. And this game, he's a British guy, and this game Icicle, there is a Flash version. You can go and look it up. It's actually called Icicle on Thin Ice, I think is the full title of the game. So it's a version of Icicle, the Flash game that is made specifically for iOS, and it is probably the most beautiful game that I saw at GDC. Like it uses it's 2D, but it uses like a lot of art influences. Like there's a Salvador Dali level where you have to like sort of navigate through a Salvador Dali painting, and then there's a level where you have to navigate through the painting of the guy with the apple in front of his face. Magritte, I think, is the painter that did that one. So there's all these classical art influences, and it's a platforming game, but it's a very like artistic, very abstract, and the pacing is really good as well. It's kind of tough to explain, but you know, there's a part where a snowball is rolling after you down a hill, and the snowball comes really close to you, and it looks like you're about to get demolished, and then it rolls back a little bit, and just like the way that the whole scene is paced feels really, really exciting, and it's really well done. Like you can tell that this guy has put a lot of heart and a lot of time into this game. So Icicle is coming out from Chillingo on iOS in the next month or so, and it was probably the most impressive game that I saw at GDC. It was really cool to see. So,
Jess in the comments says that Towerfall was made by Matt Thorson.
Yes.
So, and there's also a link to that in the comments as well.
We made another game. I forget what it was, but I forget I'm sorry, I'm not prepared for this at all. But it's a great game, and you can go check out his blog. He has a blog, and I know he's talked about the development. You can actually go watch a video of Towerfall on that blog. It's really cool to see. So,
when you said Towerfall, you said you want to talk about Towerfall. I thought you were going to bore me by talking about tower defense.
Oh, no, it's not tower defense. Oh, and Jess Condit also points out that we have talked about Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time, which is a great game that we've covered on Joystiq before. It's literally called Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time, and it's a two-player game where two characters are on the same spaceship, and I don't even know if I can explain this, but like you control a guy, and there's like 6 stations. So one of the stations controls the gun on this side, and one of the stations controls the gun on the left side, and one of the stations controls actually moving the ship through space, and one of the stations controls a shield that you can like move around. And so you and another player have to like control this ship together through these controls and like try to live as long as possible. And it's very exciting. It was a lot of fun to play. I don't know when it's coming out, but again, it's sort of a multiplayer game that you're going to need 2 people to play. I think there is like a version where the computer will play with you, but it doesn't seem nearly as fun. I played this game called Lovers in Dangerous Space-Time, and I played with some random other guy from the convention. So, and the other thing is when your characters pass by each other, a little bit of like love hearts pop off of you, and you heal each other a little bit. So I would run by this guy in the game, and like love hearts would come off of each of us, and I was like, "Sorry, dude, sorry." So it was weird. It was interesting. It's a co-op game that really like pushes you together into this weird partnership that you need to save this spaceship with. So it was a lot of fun. Anyway,
well,
that's
cool because I feel like a lot of co-op games, at least the mainstream ones, on like your cooperation extends to the point where you are both shooting at the same thing, and that's kind of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and it's cool.
Oh, stand on this button. I'll go stand on this other button, and now the gate will open.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I think in games like Journey, I think did a really good job too of
yeah, I mean it's cool in games like Journey where they don't just give you gameplay things to do co-op, but they give you a reason to be co-op. Like they give you a reason to care about what the other player is doing, or a reason to be interested in what is going on with the other player.
If you can just subtract the other player or replace him with an NPC, then maybe it's not that cooperative.
Right. True. Mm-hmm. So that's a very quick look at some of the best stuff I saw at GDC. I thought there were a lot of good games. I heard a few people being like, "Oh, this GDC is boring," and of course, I'm sure the Battlefield 4 type stuff didn't help. But the indie scene was there were a lot of really impressive things coming out of GDC this year, I thought.
Yeah, it's really great. I wonder. Hopefully, those guys don't, because I actually did see some people talk about how though there are a lot of indie developers that go to GDC, it's still a pretty pricey proposition for them to spend money to go to an event like this. Even PAX costs a lot of money for these developers to go to. Even in those little tiny booths that they have, it's pretty expensive to go to these events. So it's interesting.
There's not really an ideal way to show these off too. Like most of these games that I saw, Gravity's Ghost is another game I really like. That game also was at this thing that was held in the actual IGN offices. It was just like a little indie meetup, and there was no food, there was no alcohol. It was just a bunch of people getting together, and they brought their own laptops and their own desktops just to show off these games. So, and I mean, there's a GDC Play is what it's called. Like there's a floor area where you can actually rent a little half booth and set up and play there. But there's not really a great way. And I'm lucky when I cover mobile stuff because if developers want to show me their new game, they just bring an iPad over and show it to me. But yeah, you're right that it's a pretty significant cost to fly to San Francisco and buy a ticket to GDC, and then it's a pretty tough way, especially when you have an installed game, even any type of game like that, where I don't know what's going to happen with Ouya. Like right now, Sony. We saw Rain at a Sony-sponsored indie meetup where they sort of invited all these indie guys to show their games off. But if you have an Ouya game and you can't afford to like bring an Ouya and bring a TV to GDC and set it up somewhere and show it to people, I don't know how it's going to work. So it'd be interesting to see how that, as the indie scene gets bigger and bigger, what solutions people come up with to do that type of stuff.
When you guys were at GDC, did you actually get to mess around with that system, the Ouya?
Richard played with it, I know. I didn't. I played one game on an Ouya. It was not an appointment with Ouya. There was just one of the games that they were demoing, and the Ouya was there. So I played with it a little bit, but I don't have one. You guys, I think, said you don't want one. I want one. Like I think it's really cool. I didn't back it when it first came out, but I think that Ouya is interesting, and I'm interested to try it. I'm not 100% sold on it, but I'm definitely interested to try it out.
I mean, I would like to see what all the hype is all about. I think that there's a lot of stuff that system is supposed to do that it doesn't do yet, so I think people are waiting for all of that content to show up. And, of course, games is another issue.
Yeah, I think there's problems with it, but I also am excited about the potential for it, which I think is the biggest, coolest thing about it right now. It's just the potential so far, so we'll see.
They have a lot of big people supporting it, so hopefully that's going to translate into a good product. The only problem is if when you have so many people who are good at a certain thing or sort of have been leaders of certain kinds of products, there could be this like design by committee issue that might come up.
Well, I think the main thing
that actually it might be a problem too with the actual games itself, because it's sort of the way that it's regulated. It's sort of anyone could put anything up there, right?
Yeah,
That
I
could
mean,
be
I
an
don't
issue.
really have a huge problem with that because I think the best stuff is always going to come to the top, and sites like Joystiq will help pick out, the games that are worth looking at, that are worth checking out. So I think that there are ways to get around that. That's kind of the issue with the App Store right now. Like anybody can release anything on there essentially, and it's kind of hard to find the really good stuff. But one of the problems that a lot of people have said with the Ouya so far is like, oh, the games are so casual, like they're just mobile games on this console, and I think that will change as people get more and more used to the idea of getting more and more complex games on the console. Like we're even seeing more and more iPad games now being pretty complex games that are going out there. So I think it's something that's going to grow over time, but I don't think that it's a fair assessment to be like, oh, well, the Ouya just plays a bunch of phone games. Like I think as people get used to delivering games through the consoles like this, you'll see more and more complex console games show up. So
Okay.
now, obviously, a one-man developer team is going to have a really tough time turning out a game with as much content as like Mass Effect 3 or something like that. But look at Retro City
I don't think anyone
Rampage.
expects Mass Effect 3 on a Ouya anyway. So
Right, but look at Retro City Rampage. Like that's a one-man developer, and he put out a ton of content. Like there's a lot of stuff in that game. It's a pretty complex game. So
sure. All right, so there should be a rule that we agree to before we start talking about BioShock Infinite, which is that we're not going to spoil
no
the game
spoilers
for anyone. So
I was scared before I played it that I would get spoiled, and I'm very lucky that I didn't. So I will not ruin it for anyone else either. So
we had me and Letty talked a little bit about this on Twitter recently about sort of that culture of spoilers. And what bothers me about people who are so sensitive to it is when it's something as simple as like, I was on We Can Confirmed, and Jeff Kanata mentioned that the game sort of tilts towards sci-fi at some point, and everyone's like, God, that's such a spoiler. It's like it's a city that's floating into the sky with like a half man with a head cut off. He's like half man, half robot. It's like, yeah, it already is very clear that it's going to tilt a certain way into fantasy. So it's just that's
Wait,
the
the city tilts? Thanks for spoiling it.
it's it's even like a line that I kind of, it was like a metaphor that I used in the review. Someone complained that I spoiled something in the review.
I did notice that. I saw your review. I didn't read your review, but I saw the headline, and then when the line came up in the game, I was like, oh, Zav, thanks for nothing.
No. So yeah, BioShock Infinite, we reviewed it last week. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to talk about it because GDC was happening, but it's a pretty fantastic game. I love the game. I think it's probably one of the best told stories of this generation, as I wrote in the review. In terms of gameplay, I think the gameplay is quite good and better than the original BioShock with some enhancements. It feels better, it plays better, but it's still not, I'm still not playing that game because it's a great shooter. I think that there are some really great elements to it. I think that the skyhook stuff is fantastic. It was weird when you saw the demo of this at E3 or whenever they showed it off, and you're like, how is that even going to work? Like how are you going to play that? It just seems like
it seems so on rails.
it certainly does, and it works out very well. I think that I wish that there was more of the skyhook stuff, and I wish that it was a little bit more intricate, because the joke being that it is on rails, that it is one very linear line. You can move around the environment, and it works out a little bit in order sort of to gain traction on the enemies that are attacking you. One thing that the game does very well is that enemies sort of attack from multiple sides, and you can sort of gain leverage on them by changing your terrain or changing your cover. And then when you have Elizabeth with you, she can actually enhance your experience as well by opening tears that give you weapons or cover, or even mechanical devices that work in your favor. I think that is really interesting. So on the gameplay side, I think it works really well.
I thought that they did a really good job, speaking of gameplay, in terms of making the skyhooks a benefit. Like there were times, especially when I was starting out, where I was like, I'm surrounded, I don't know what to do here, and then I realized, oh, there's a skyhook right above me. Like that's the tactical advantage that I can take advantage of. So I think they did a really great job of like
the whole implementation of it is good. Like they kept it simple. It's basically tied to your jumping. You just look, and then the game, like you can rely on it. Like that's the most important thing. Like you don't feel uncertain about it working or not working.
Right. You know that when you want to get on the skyhook,
of a platform every single time. So.
Yeah, when you want to get on a skyhook, go in a certain way. You just do what you need to do, and you'll do it, and it'll work the way that you expect it to, which is
right.
the highest praise you can give to
play a shooter where you can move like that, right? Like where you can navigate in that kind of way so quickly, be so agile. But I think I disagree. At least from like I've only played a few hours of it, but I think I disagree about it playing better than BioShock.
I also disagree. I heard you say that, and we can talk about it too. But Letty, why do you think that the first game is maybe a little better?
So it's a couple of things. Like I think the pacing of a BioShock game is very slow because you want to explore and you're looking for items, like you're opening drawers and trash cans and you're digging for stuff. You're looking for resources. The pacing is very slow. When people start shooting at you, that pace ratchets up, right? I think in BioShock 1 and 2, because so much of it was melee combat, that jump wasn't as large. Like I feel like the increase in speed and shooting is too jarring. And once you get into the shooting, I think the game is because of how you use your powers and how they combine and things like that. It doesn't feel very tactical to me. It feels more like a Devil May Cry or a Bulletstorm, in how you sort of like it's up to you to find really fun combinations and do as much damage to enemies as possible. Even though you can kind of rely on the same stuff from beginning to end, really. At least that's what it seems like. But the game doesn't have a reward for playing it that way. Like it's not about survival because you have a shield. So you never feel in danger that much, and it's not about earning points. So I feel like the motivation of playing the game in a certain way and fighting in a certain way just it's not really there. You know?
Yeah, my biggest issue, and I don't know, Zab, do you want to respond to that, and then I'll tell you what I think.
Go ahead.
My biggest issue is kind of in the setting, and I don't consider this a spoiler because we've talked about it from the preview before, and I think it's very clear going into the game. But in the first BioShock, you were coming to this city that had passed by. I mean, it was pretty much done. Everybody in the city was pretty much lost beyond you, and pretty much everybody around you. The game had a solid setting that it never really gave up on that premise. Like it was like you were going to an abandoned city essentially, or ruined city at least. In this one, Ken Levine clearly tried to put you in a city that was still alive. Like there were still things that you can explore and things you can find in it, and there are parts that you weren't supposed to just run in and shoot everyone. And I don't think that's quite as powerful and straightforward as the other vision of it, if that makes sense. Like I think the setting of Columbia is very cool, obviously, but it's not as it didn't feel as strong or as interesting to me as the more unified, straightforward setting that we were given in the first game. And so I think as a result, like there are parts in this game where you are just meant to walk around and explore a little bit. And while I like those parts a lot, I didn't think that was as effective as crawling through a ruined city was in the first one. So
yeah, I don't really see how that has anything to do with the gameplay. I mean, the setting itself, I guess you just preferred in the first game. But I mean, they're very different objectives, I think, in what both of these games are trying to do. So the first game was showing you the aftermath of what people thought was a utopia, of like this perfect society. And in Colombia, it's sort of this city that's been lost in terms of it's sort of disappeared, and you see how these two warring sides are fighting over it. It's sort of like if you were to watch Rapture fall apart, this is sort of what happened to Rapture when it was falling apart. Like now in Colombia, you get to see it falling apart. You get to see how the people interact with it. You get to see the warring sides, and you see how this American exceptionalism has gone insane and sort of gone beyond what what you would assume could happen in society. Because it's the thing that I find really interesting about it, and I've heard people say this before, where they kind of felt like they were getting one kind of game based on what they saw, and then the game sort of really focuses on characters rather than the setting. I think the thing that was so interesting about BioShock was that in the original BioShock, Rapture was that secondary character because it was just you. You were isolated, you barely spoke to anyone, and you met other characters that gave you sort of insight into the world and your objectives.
But I mean, but in BioShock 1, you're arguably one of them. Like, you are using plasmids to increase your power, basically.
Well, you become see, and I will. This is one thing that I will
like
admit.
You were sort of engaging in that objectivism in some way.
Yes, I mean it was done at a specific point in the narrative to give you the ability to survive. The only reason why you inject yourself, I think, in the beginning is because you need to. You're sort of given no option. I will say though that if anything in BioShock Infinite it makes no sense is even the appearance of the elixirs. I mean, at least in the original BioShock was people were so full of themselves that they wanted to enhance them as human beings, and to enhance yourself you would give yourself these abilities. In Columbia there was zero logical reason for it to even exist, but because it's
right, like that is a story element that's there because it's a BioShock game, not because it is a story. So that was a miss. Like they could have gone with, I don't know, just a kind of a different explanation, or even just tone down.
Well, I mean, they could have went with the same explanation and they don't give you anything, really. It's just like you walk through
it's kind of like a sideshow thing.
It is certainly, and that's sort of, I think, the way that they try to explain it, of like, oh my god, you're like, how cool is this stuff? Because you see it at a fair and people are using it.
But it's like so dangerous. Like how? I mean, it honestly doesn't make sense. It's a problem because the game is, it expects you to buy into a lot of the stuff, and they're trying to make it a coherent whole. Not to harp on the shooting. Like, I do think there's some element of Trojan horsing going on. Like, Ken Levine has this awesome story and he kind of wants to sell it, but to do so he has to put it in a shooter. So that's fine. It's a necessary evil. But as a shooter, I think it's not as effective as BioShock. There's not that much. I didn't feel like there was as much dynamic interaction between things. Because remember, in BioShock 1, you could hack a turret and you could lure a Big Daddy to the turret, and like that would create some kind of combat, and then you would throw bees in, and there was a lot of cool things that interact.
For me, there's a number of like pieces that don't hit the same mark, and I think the primary piece of that is the enemies in BioShock Infinite, and I wrote this in the review, are not nearly as interesting as the enemies in the original BioShock.
Good, like you don't have something that's that dangerous that you have to focus so much effort into.
Well, think about when you heard a Big Daddy in the background, and just the sound was, oh my god, I need to find out where this is. Hopefully, I don't interrupt it. Like, you had to prepare yourself to fight it. There was nothing like that in this
combat about survival, right? Like overcoming this. It was a very difficult thing. You were stressed out while you were fighting a Big Daddy because maybe you ran out of resources, or you died and you got sent back like so far away. Things like that. You were worried about it. In this game, like, the enemies are more meatbaggy. They're like Devil May Cry meatbags. You juggle them, you get all the points out of them, and then you kill them.
Yeah,
like that I think is the big miss with the combat.
Well, in terms of me enjoying the combat in this game more than the original, I think that the combat in the original game, there was more strategic elements because of the enemy types. And I do find, like, the enemies, just the splicers, like hiding in the ceilings, and you see it like a blip, and then they show up and they surprise you. That never happens in BioShock. In Infinite. In Infinite, like, you open a door and they'll turn around and they see you, and then they start attacking you. Like, that's as simple as it gets. So, I mean, but for me, I mean, it felt better. I thought the shooting mechanics were better. Like, on a technical level, I think it worked a little bit better. I liked the abilities. Some of the abilities work better, or are better in Infinite than in the original BioShock. Yeah. But a lot of it is,
had really cool things to lay traps with, and
sure. But a BioShock Infinite, it was sort of linked in its lack of complexity to its enemies, which, like I said in the review, aren't nearly as interesting in this game as they were in the previous game. Yeah. And I think that has a lot to do with the original game was very much about isolation and very closed quarters, and you sort of had to survive and sort of huddle into corners and sort of use your environment. In this game, you're sort of moving between sections. It's a large world, but because it's all on these platforms, essentially, you don't really have a lot of room to move around. And I think that that's where the skyhook stuff comes in handy, because then you can sort of change the terrain of those limited areas that you're in, and makes that a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's these very large set pieces, which I enjoyed, and I liked the idea of, like, and the you get a lot of different options from the environment, like not necessarily from the tools that you have, but from the environment to play with, which I thought is an interesting idea, but it does feel a lot more limited than like put a turret here, do this thing, like do this.
Like use your telekinesis to grab a cash register and kill someone with it.
Right, and even the vigors of the plasmids, like they felt so many different tools in the first game. Like that gravity plasmid, the first one, let you do a lot of different things. Like you could grab explosive objects and throw them, or you could grab things and use them as a shield. Yeah. In this one, I felt like the vigors were definitely like boiled down a little bit. Like they were definitely the same sort of archetypes there, but they weren't nearly as useful or as powerful. So I don't know. That's not to say at all this is a bad game, obviously. No. But I do kind of agree that I think the first one held out a little bit more tight, was a little bit tighter as a game than this one necessarily was.
Well, in terms of some of the gameplay, sure. I mean, I think that the original game, I remember combining elements a lot more than I ever did in this game. There were moments where I did it by accident in Infinite because I switched to another vigor and, had electrocuted someone, then blew them up with fire, and realized that I had done a combo because it, like, a little achievement thing showed up, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that. I mean, I think that this game focuses way more on the gunplay, and to balance out the vigors aren't as interesting as I think they could have been. Because even if you watch the first trailer they showed for this game, or one of the first things they showed for this game was abilities that didn't even end up in the game, which was Elizabeth. You and Elizabeth are hiding behind a cart. You pick something up with telekinesis, and she like sets it on fire or something, and then you throw that, and you're working together. But I think they toned her down to make her so you don't have to rely on her as much, and she's just a character that doesn't get in your way. And I think by making her more simple, it sort of affected the gameplay in a way that probably made it way less complex than it could have.
But she's not a simple character, though. That's really...
No. In terms of her use in gameplay, she's simple because she just hands you things. But in terms of her as a narrative device and even as a partner, she can be very effective when she helps you out.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think talking about her from a gameplay perspective is very different than talking about it from a story perspective. And I did like, I think that all comes down to you don't ever want to have to take care of her, and you don't in this game. Like she essentially takes care of herself. So. Yeah, and there are even the those load screen menus that say that one of them even says like, "Don't worry about Elizabeth; she can take care of herself." Like right.
They really want to make it clear that she's not going to get in your way. Although sometimes, and I joked about this before too, you will turn around and she will be standing there like that Watson Sherlock Holmes
YouTube video. She does do that a little bit, yeah.
She does do that a little bit, and it kind of freaks me out.
No spoilers here, but when you are if you're still playing to the game, make sure you just stop and watch her. Because there are so many cool context-sensitive things that she can do in the different areas that you are in. Like, she responds to the environment almost constantly. And if you're just running through, you'll never see it. And there were a couple times where I ran through and I wouldn't see it, but then every once in a while I would notice her doing something that must have been designed just for that specific thing. So I don't want to spoil anything, but watch Elizabeth, because I am surprised at how complex she actually is as an AI NPC character and in terms of the environment. And there are a lot of good moments where if you just turn around and look and see what Elizabeth is up to, you will be... I was very surprised. There are a few different moments where I was like, whoa, she must know that, I'm where I actually, felt like she was in this with me and in this environment and reacting in the same way that I was. So anyway, hopefully that was spoiler-free.
I've heard a lot of people mention that they find the game to be extraordinarily gory and violent, which, it is gory and violent, but I don't really have an issue with that.
That's an interesting discussion to me, because so I'm curious as to why BioShock Infinite is the game that triggers the conversation, first of all.
I feel like because
why are games so gory, guys?
I feel like it's because this game has sort of never shown off a lot of that in its marketing. I feel like with most shooters, you'll see, there's an expectation of violence or gore, and this game has been really focusing, at least in its marketing, to the hardcore consumer, that it is a narrative-driven experience.
The first instance of violence, I think, is deliberately in your face and gross, because it's kind of leading up. So let's talk about the game's opening. Like, we won't spoil it, but there's you get to this place and it's like it's so idyllic and you're kind of like, wow, this is amazing. I can't believe this place. I'm just going to bathe in the sunlight and it just seems like this utopia. I can't believe it. And the sort of the first message that you get is that this veneer isn't necessarily representative of what's going on underneath the city, right? And you get that rude awakening where it's like there's something that you should have noticed was not there when you got there. Like there's something missing. There was someone missing. But you were too busy going like, oh, this is amazing, the floating city, I can't believe it. Like, oh, everyone looks like, and then there's that rude awakening, and then you kind of turn and there's that violent scene in the sort of exposition.
It's
very
really,
difficult to talk about it in non-specific terms.
It provides a rude awakening to you that this world may not be everything it seems. And I
think it's more.
The first instance is clearly used in that way, but yeah, the rest of the game, it does kind of seem a little out of place occasionally. I think that there might be a story reason for it that we don't want to get into right now, but that's my guess. Is
okay.
They're actually reason for it. Go ahead, Joe.
We've literally already our last previews were the entire beginning of the game, and I don't want to get into specifics, but I think people know that the game has a very strong tilt towards religion and racism and a lot of societal issues and extremism. Yes, extreme patriotism. Misplaced loyalties.
Yeah.
It deals with some serious stuff. And I think that when you first sort of emerge from darkness into this city and you think that it's perfect and there's this, this blinding light and it's paradise, as you get closer to your objective, you start to see pieces of it falling away. And you start to see more of the actual color of the world coming in, about how religious the world is and how extremist it is and how racist it is. And that's where, you realize that this isn't the world that you're led to believe it is. I mean, when I first played the game for a preview, the first couple of hours of the game, I was really surprised to first learn that they sort of went really more into this direction, because originally the game wasn't so much in this direction. It used to be Comstock was a very different character. He looked very different. So I don't even know how the story has evolved over time. But I was really surprised to see stuff like the racism angle and all of that stuff. Now, I think that paints a better picture when you get to see sort of people's reaction and people's their beliefs up front. I think that works better than in Rapture, where you're sort of led down this path of your sort of discovering all these things about the world, but then you also have to put your perspective on it, because there's no one explicitly telling you what they think. You do get those recordings, but in this game you actually get to see people be horrible. It gives you a better understing of what the world actually is. Well, you have an opportunity
to participate as well.
Yes, and you have an opportunity to participate as well.
Implied opportunity.
Yeah. So, spoilers. Shooting in this game? What the hell?
I think we've done pretty well.
Yeah, I think we've done pretty well.
Of talking concretely about what it is without ruining what it actually is.
Right.
I like it. And I like that Site Untitled in the comments says, please follow up with a spoiler-filled Infinite discussion. So I'm sure at some point we will have to just open up the floodgates and talk about what this really means, because it is a fascinating game when you talk about the whole thing.
It is very fascinating, and I know you guys still have not finished it.
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay. So I mean, the game is just outstanding, and I think it's a great narrative story. And I don't know how deep we want to get into the narrative of the game, but how was your impression? Because I know you also loved BioShock, Letty, but what was your impression of sort of the way it's telling the story? Because this game, though, is very heavily inspired by that game, tells the story very differently.
I'm intrigued so far. Like, I think one of the main elements that is often missing in video game storytelling is mystery, because games are so overtly made for you to succeed, and like you get all the tools that you need, and there's often you get your objective and that's it. Like, there's no mystery, and I think the game from the beginning does a good job of setting up multiple threads. Like, even the very first conversation you hear in the game seems like it's throwaway, but like this, the way it plays out kind of makes you ask some questions. When you first die in the game, something happens and you're like, oh, maybe this is important. And I think the fun part is like trying to figure out what is permissible within the usual game logic, like things that you would typically ignore and not consider part of the storyline, and what isn't. And especially coming off of BioShock 1, which was had some commentary on game design itself. That's all interesting stuff.
I will say,
I do like the two
go ahead.
recurring characters that you see every now and then.
Yeah. I will say, Zab, when I played that preview with you when we sat down to play the game for the first 3 hours, and I remember coming back from that, I was like, there's so many things that they're starting in the beginning of the game that I have no idea how they're going to land them all. Like, I feel like there's going to be some balls dropped at some point in the future. Like, there's no way that they can put all these threads up in the air and then have them weave into a quilt or whatever. And I will say that I think the game, having finished the game, I think he pulled it off. I mean, there are definitely some things that are more emphasized than others. But I was very impressed. And I was also very impressed. Like I said, I didn't get spoiled. Like, I was worried that people would say something or something would spoil me, so I didn't get spoiled. And then I was impressed that I didn't necessarily guess. I mean, there was a point, I think, where the end sort of is revealed, and it worked out well. And it worked out well for me. Like, I didn't see it coming. It surprised me, and that's what you really want with a game like this. So, again, I'm doing my absolute best to not spoil anything. But what I'm saying is, all those things in the beginning, as you said, Luddy, it seems like they mean something. They do. And as soon as I finished the game, I was like, yeah, I kind of want to run back to the beginning and start tracing all the things again and seeing where all the actual meaning came in and everything like that. So in that sense, it's very successful.
It's pretty rare that you can play a game once and sort of discover what the truth is, or discover like the mysteries and they all unravel, and then you play it again and it gives you a different perspective on exactly what it is that you're seeing or even what you're playing. I think this game does that very effectively, just like the original BioShock did very effectively. Very different in terms of narrative. I do want to say that I feel this game couldn't have worked any other way than it did in terms of Booker as a speaking character and Elizabeth, because it is so important that forget about like immersing yourself and you are Master Chief and all these other games that sort of try to throw you into that character and that try to like thrust you into that character.
You are Garrett.
This game is very effective at creating a relationship between two people, and it needs to be two people who could speak to each other and have interaction and communicate and need to react off of one another. One thing that's really interesting about the gameplay is if you execute someone with a melee attack in the game, even at the end of the game, if Elizabeth is there and she sees it, she reacts to it. She screams and she is shocked that it's happening. Like, that's basically the only time that ever really happens. But it's very interesting to add that character as sort of your commentary throughout some of those scenarios.
I want to talk spoilers about this because there's so many little moments that we
will certainly do spoilers. I'm not going to spoil it. I don't want to be a jerk.
We always say that.
We're not going to spoil it now.
I want to do it for this one. We always say it, but I've never really liked a game enough to want to do it. And this game,
this is a game. Yeah, this is a game that calls for heavy discussion where you don't worry about what you're saying. You know what you're revealing.
I think it's a fantastic game. I've played a lot of games this year so far, and it's certainly one of my favorites. And it's going to be an interesting year. I mean, this year we're sort of going to be thrown at all of these discussions about the next generation of consoles, and everything is prettier and everything is more advanced on a technical level. But I really hope that people aren't so focused on making things look great, and they're focused on making things smart. And I think that this is a very smart game in terms of its story and its design. Whether or not you feel that it's better or worse in terms of, in pieces than its previous games, but I think this is a fantastic game from Irrational. My favorite game they've ever made, and I really like SWAT 4. So there you go.
And if you like BioShock Infinite, keep an eye on Metro Last Light. Lots of similarities.
Yeah, in terms of how it's designed and really puts you into a world.
And how the environment is such a big character.
And hey, if you haven't played Metro 2033, you should, because that game didn't sell gangbusters, but it should have.
Are there skyhooks in Metro Last Light?
There are not. There are no skyhooks.
Oh, no sale.
There are gas masks, though.
Nah, I'm out.
I will say that it's going to be interesting to see when you think about how Tomb Raider sold a certain amount, or sold through a certain amount to retail, and it was still considered not a success by Square Enix. This game reportedly, by some accounts, cost $200 million to make. So it's going to be interesting to see.
quickly, though. I don't think it
Okay.
was.
Well, let's say I don't imagine it was a cheap game to make or market, and this game was delayed multiple times and is on multiple.
It was probably cheaper than GTA 5, though.
Probably. I mean, but that's going to sell like, you know.
Thanks.
Insane.
Nice job supporting his point there, Letty. Go
My
ahead.
point being, it's going to be interesting to see how well this game does at retail and how successful it is, because I mean, let's say this game doesn't sell very well, which could possibly happen. What does Irrational do next, or what does 2K allow them to do next with a budget for a video game? I mean, are they going to be making the next SWAT game? I mean, they sort of put themselves in a great position. That original BioShock took them forever to sell to someone, and 2K picked it up. No one wanted to release that game, and it ended up being an insane success because of how great it was. A lot of word of mouth. I don't even know that the marketing was there, but it was just so driven by it being a quality title that people told people to go play it. I don't know how well Infinite's going to do comparably. Like when you compare it to that, we don't know how it's going to do. We're going to find out, obviously, when the numbers come out. But what do they do next? What could they do next? Could they make another game that is very story-driven, or that takes as long as this game took to make?
I don't know. I mean, it's a fair point. There's not a lot of replay value on this one. Like, I kind of do want to go back and replay the story just to see it, but there's no multiplayer. There's no reason to keep playing. There's DLC coming, I guess. Like, there's DLC in the menus, but I don't know what that is, or if that's just
It's three DLC packs that are going to be obviously have to be single player.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
So there will be some sort of story or something to them or something.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that's kind of an issue for actually selling this game. Now, I don't know, because it couldn't have been reviewed any better. The reviews were incredible on it. But yeah, it's a good question if people are going to run to pick this thing up or not. So I don't know.
I think that's going to do it for this episode of the show. I want to thank you for watching us. We are not broadcasting on the Joystiq YouTube channel. We are actually broadcasting on mine because the Joystiq channel is having a technical issue. But subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/joystiq. We also have the show that's going to be up on Friday with the news segment in audio form. That's going to be up around noon tomorrow. And if you like the show, support us by subscribing and by giving us a review on iTunes. So thank you again very much for watching. And guys, thank you for participating in another edition of the Super Joystiq Podcast. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.